G'day everyone, welcome to the channel. For those that are new here, I am a wildlife photographer based in Australia. I'm in the fortunate position that I get to photograph all the beautiful animals that live in this country. I'm now sharing that with you on this channel, so I'm going to record in the field when I'm out there photographing birds and kangaroos and whatnot. And I'm also going to do some processing videos on the computer here and share that with you, so share the process of how I actually go from start to finish. So there'll be timestamps in the description below if you want to jump forward to Lightroom or Photoshop and you don't want to hear me rambling on. So have a look at that, because these videos will be fairly long. So I've made a couple, maybe you could do the same and we can go through this together. Before I get started, I just thought I'd touch on a few things. A few people have asked me whether I was impacted by the recent bushfires in Australia. I'm very fortunate that this property wasn't impacted. The fires came to within about 60 kilometres of here. We had a lot of smoke. We have a bushfire evacuation plan for the property. We have somewhere to go. The town where we live has a centre set up for people to go, and a lot of people did go there. So south of us was impacted by the fire. My heart goes out to all the people that were impacted, and of course the people that have died. It's fairly tragic. My heart also goes out to all the animals, of course, that their habitat has been destroyed. The impacts of that, I'm not sure how big they are or how long it will take to recover. I hope to in the future to go up there and maybe have a look and take a few photos and take you along so we can see the devastation of the landscape up there. So this week I'm going to process some white-browed wood swallows. If you watched my last video, you would have seen we had a big flock of them turn up at the watering hole. They do form flocks and they get very noisy. Great bird to watch. They have a fair bit of character about them. There's a few different wood swallows in Australia. This one's probably one of the more common ones around here. So let's jump onto the computer and have a look how I process these images. Okay, so I've just opened up Lightroom. I've got the images from the session. In my last processing video, I talked about how I rate images, 5 stars being the best and 1 star being the least best, and then I delete all the images that I don't want or don't have a star rating. With this, I actually only had a very short period of time to photograph these birds. They were there and then they were gone. So I only managed to get a few, and just having a look here, I've got 8 images that I have starred, and you'll quickly notice that 4 of them are obviously of the bird and then 4 of them are of the perch, and I'll explain why I've done that in a minute. So we'll bring up this image here. We've got the 2 birds. It is a little bit dark in the raw image. We've shot it at f8. I was sitting in a blind, hidden, and I'd put up all the perches for the birds to land on. So I purposely put those perches up, hoping the birds would land on those before they go to the water. So birds use staging areas before going to water. So what I mean by that is they'll often start up fairly high, they'll fly in and generally they'll be in a tree or something like that, and they'll work their way down to the water generally. So if you can give them spots to land on before they get to the water, you've got a chance that they'll land on those perches before making it to the water. So in this case, I've got a few perches leading towards the water, and these wood swallows were happily landing on those perches that I've put up. I was very fortunate when the male and the female, so the male's on the right, who has more of the white brow, and the female is on the left. I was very fortunate that they both turned up at the same time on the same perch, and I was able to photograph them. The biggest issue whenever you're photographing 2 or more birds on the same perch is the depth of field and getting them all in focus. It can be very difficult because your depth of field is generally quite narrow, and if you're close, like I am, this is full frame, your depth of field is even narrower. So I've got a real issue getting both these birds in focus, and I was slightly aware of that. I was using f8, possibly could have gone to f9, didn't have time. So I was aware when I took these shots that these birds, both of them might not be in focus, and I had to check. In this shot, we'll quickly see, if we go to 100%, is that the female is just out of focus. The male is in focus, but the female is just out of focus, which is a bit of a shame, but with some extra sharpening, and we will be able to get some more detail out of that and make it a usable image, as you saw in my last video. So that's what we're looking at, and you'll see that the perch is actually slightly out of focus. because we've focused on the head of the bird, of the male bird, or in this area, and the perch is obviously just behind that head, and it's far enough away out of the depth of field that it's starting to go out of focus. I did actually just do all the processing of this one raw file for the previous video, but I've just noticed that if we go and have a look at the other photos in this series, so you'll see this photo here, there's actually a bird flying away. You may wonder why I've got that image. The reason I've selected this image is that the perch is a lot sharper. So the focus has grabbed the perch, and you can see how much sharper it is. But the issue with the right hand shot is the male is now out of focus, because it's obviously focused slightly in front of this male, but the female is actually more in focus in this shot than in this shot. So we've got two images. The one on the left has a sharp male head and chest, and everything else is slightly soft, and the image on the right is the perch is sharp and the female is sharp. So what we can actually do is we can use both of these images and merge them in Photoshop so that we get a sharp image all the way over. I've mentioned this last time, it's up to you whether you use two exposures. If you want to be a purist or you're not comfortable doing that, that's entirely up to you. I'm very open about how I process my images. I've taken both these images. It was obviously sharp to my eyes when I was looking at it, and I've got these two images, so I can and will use both exposures. Okay, so I had those four shots, and I've ultimately gone with the first one I got for the male and the second shot I've got for the perch and the female, and I will adjust both of those raw, and then we'll export that and do that in Photoshop. But what I noticed in a skill that I use in the field is if you've taken an image and you think, oh gee, it's a bit tight, as in the birds are full in the frame, and you'd like more around the bird, because you don't want to suffocate your image with the bird being enormous and you can't see anything else. So we often like a bit of space around the bird. But what you can do is if you've taken a shot, and when we look at this, there's not a lot at the top of the image. There's almost, it's very tight. So sometimes if I'm in the field and I realize that and I have time, I'll actually purposely photograph the perch and around it so that later in post I can actually use parts of these other images for the final one. So you'll see here, this image here, I've purposely focused on the perch and moved the camera, and so I had a lot more space at the top of the image, which I can use to add height above. So be aware when you're out there. Sometimes some photographers I know will even photograph the perch, obviously nearly every time, so that the perch is sharp, because sometimes the perch won't be sharp, but if you photograph just the perch, maybe at a bit higher f-stop, f9, you can then use that and the other images and join them together. Entirely up to you, but that's one technique some photographers do use. So if I open up this one here, we go to the develop module, and we want to develop this image. It's clearly too dark, and we can tell by the histogram that we needed to push it to the right a little bit more. So we can adjust the, go to the right with the, that's looking pretty good to my eye. I'm not going to crop in Lightroom at this stage, and I'll explain why. It's often easier to merge two images without cropping them, because the birds will be the same size generally in both images. So what I mean is if you crop two images differently and then try and overlay them in Photoshop, you'll struggle to match them up because the birds will be a different size. So I don't do any cropping in Lightroom if I'm merging images. Okay, so the exposure looks pretty good. I think the white balance is not too bad, so I'll leave the white balance as it is. As I mentioned before, probably 5 points of contrast. The highlights are pretty good. I probably don't want to turn them down too much because the background will go a bit dark. So it looks fine to my eye. Shadows, we can always lift those shadows a bit just to reveal a bit more detail in the bird. The blacks, we could turn those down a bit just to get in a bit more contrast. And I will actually just do a quick adjustment brush on the eyebrow here so that it's not quite so bright. So the highlights, I've actually turned the highlights down to -30 in exposure, and then I just paint that over this brow and it will reduce how bright that is. I can't see too many other bright images, sorry, I can't see any other bright parts that require the highlights to be turned down, so I'm happy with that. Texture, again, I don't do a lot of that. Vibrancy, usually turn that up a little bit. Pays to look at the whole image to see you know, what it's looking like. Be careful with the vibrance and saturation. You definitely don't want to overdo it. You know, you can turn this all the way and it starts to look a little bit funny. Saturation has a bigger impact and it just starts to look wrong. So just be aware of that saturation. Okay, the highlights were good. Remove chromatic aberrations, enable the profile corrections. I don't do any highlight priority, so I'm actually fairly happy with how that looks for the raw file. So I'll export that. The trick now is if you want both images that you're blending in Photoshop to look the same, you've got to apply the same raw adjustments to both images. You can just right click on the image and go to develop settings and copy the settings, and then you select the second image and you right click on it and develop settings and you paste the settings, and it will put the same raw adjustments you made from the previous image to the next image, so that when you overlay them they'll look the same. One's not going to be darker or lighter than the other. So that's how we keep that continuity. And I also need to do it to that this last image, which is the Perch one, which I'm using the top part of this, so I need to paste to get the background the same. So I now have these 3 images. I'll export these 3 into another folder I have as TIFFs files, and I have a folder called Needs Processing. Photos in that folder are the ones that I need to process in Photoshop. Okay, so we're in Photoshop and I've imported the 3 files that we worked on in Lightroom into Photoshop. We've got the first main image, we've got the second image which has the sharp perch, and we've got the third image which is just the perch. So this image here, I could just process this on its own. Look, it's fine as it is, and that's what I did before, but for this video I just want to show you how I would actually merge 2 exposures together. So we will use this as the base layer, and I would select this image. I want to put this on top of the other one, so I can just move it. I make sure this image is selected, and over here on the right hand side in the layers I just drag the layer onto the top of the other image, and then I can close this one. So this here now has 2 layers. It has the original image, and so it has the original image, and then it has this image on top. We need to align this image with the bottom image. There's probably, I think there's a way in Photoshop you can do it to align the images, but I find it a little bit problematic at times, so I just do it by eye. I change the opacity of this layer here to about 50%, and then I zoom in and I take the move tool and I just move it until it's about right, and I actually use the keys on the keyboard to make the final adjustments, and I just turn the layer on and off to get it to looks pretty good and very close. So you just use your eye. That looks pretty good to me. And then you change that opacity back to 100%. And at 100% we can see the difference between the two, and how sharp the perches and the feet are compared to the image underneath. So what I want to do now, and this is probably a little bit complicated if you haven't used Photoshop before, is we want to use masks, a thing called a mask, which reveals or hides the layers. So in Photoshop we've got this layer here, so the sharp layer is currently sitting on top of that bottom layer, and we want to reveal So if I put a mask on here and I change the blend, I actually don't know what the terminology is, but I need to change this mask to hide, which is Control and I, and it's gone black. You can see how it's gone black. It's currently hiding that layer, so it's masked, it's hiding. We cannot see it. So all we can see at the moment is the bottom layer. Now if I want to reveal some of that sharp layer, I need to select the paintbrush tool, which is B on the keyboard, and then you have an opacity and you have the size, so you can change the size with the brackets and you can see how it changes. And then you simply just, what they call paint. I can reveal the layer by just holding down the left mouse button and just dragging, and you can see how I am painting the that layer, and you can see how it's changing it and revealing that layer. And so I can just do this to the parts that I want to be sharp, which is obviously this entire bird. So if you want to see what you have and you haven't done, you can push the backspace key and it will show you the areas that you have and haven't done. So we just need to go around the bird and do it. And so all I'm doing here is revealing that top layer. And I've just noticed that by actually using the brush tool, I've got it to fairly soft on the edges of that tool, and you can see it's actually, I don't know if you can see this, it's just something you need to be aware of. It's caught the shoulder here, and we don't want that, so we want to hide this part which is actually being revealed. So I need to change the color of the brush to black and just make sure that we're not revealing any of this by accident. So that's fine. I need to change the color of the brush back. You can just push X on the keyboard. Alright. And we'll do the rest of it. And we'll reveal this sharp layer. And you'll see we'll run into an issue. I want to get rid of this grey area here, and there's a couple of ways you could do it. But the way that I do it is I basically just want to copy this area below up to here. So a standard way to do that, so a lot of people just use the healing brush tool, and that's fine, but I actually prefer to copy this area here and move it, and then I'll show you how I do it. It might be easier. Okay, so I've got this layer here. I've created this additional layer. I now want to move this layer up, only a touch. So I hit the move tool. I simply drag it up a bit. So it's now sitting above the other layer. What I'm wanting to do is I'm wanting to paint this top layer onto the bottom layer. So I need to hide this layer. So we had a mask and I need to invert it. So Control I. It's now hidden. Now I just want to reveal the part, I now want to reveal this top layer. So I hit the brush tool, make sure the color is white, and you'll see when I make the opacity 100%, hit 0 on the keyboard, I just paint on here and it's revealing that layer above, but it's revealing the part that I want because we've moved it up, so it's revealing what we want. So I just use the paintbrush and we reveal, just changing the size of the brush using the bracket keys, and you want to make the brush smaller when you want to get into areas, harder areas. Okay. Alright, so I'll show you before and after. So that was before and that was after, and all we've done is moved that layer up and then revealed. So basically all we've done is taken this part here and moved it up here, and it's very, very similar type of background, and it works well, and I do that a lot. So I'll often, if I want to copy, say, this part of the image and put it here, I'll just move it and then reveal it using masks. As mentioned, masks are very powerful, and it's definitely worth your time looking that up on YouTube and understanding how masks work. Alright, so I've revealed that. Okay, so now that I've got the image looking how I've merged those two layers, it's looking good. I can now process that. It's become obvious to me that there's not enough space above the bird. What I mean is it's a little bit, it feels a little bit cramped above, so you want a bit more space. So we want to add some canvas to the top of this image. And there's a couple of ways to do it. But first we need to increase the canvas size. So if you come up to image and then go canvas size, we'll just make this 6,000 pixels, so make it too big, and then we can crop later. So click OK. So we've added the canvas, you can see above, but now we don't want it white. We obviously want the top part to look very similar to this part, and that's where that other layer comes into play. So I've still got it open here. So this is the background. So we want to take the top part of this image and put it on this image. So the way to do that is I need to drag or copy this this image as a layer on this one. So I just drag it from here onto there, and using the move tool we'll move it up to where we want it. But obviously that doesn't look right, so we need to hide this layer and then reveal the part we want. So to do that, we click on this layer, we add a mask, and then we need to invert that mask to hide this layer, Control I. So that layer is now hidden, but we want to reveal that top part, so we hit the brush tool, and we've got to make sure the brush tool is white because this mask is black. So the white brush will reveal that layer. So I need a bigger brush type. Make sure the opacity is at 100%, and I simply brush, and I am revealing that layer that is hidden, and it kind of magically adds this to the top. And as you can see, it looks fantastic. We can't even tell that I've done that. So that's looking good. So I'll show you before and after. That was before I painted on, and that was after. It's a very simple way just to add a little bit of canvas. If the background's roughly the same, there are at times you'll run into it, it's a little bit tricky. For this example, it works fine. So now we need to crop it. So I hit the crop tool. The ratio is 2:3, which is the standard. Oh, I need 2:3. So we need to do the crop. Again, cropping is something you'll get with experience. I want these birds probably to be in the left 2/3, reasonably high. It's nice and centered. So I reckon that's looking pretty good. Let's have a look. Yep, happy with that. I'm happy with that. So we've got the crop right. We've got those 3 exposures now, and you can see I probably only ended up using a tiny bit, just a sliver at the top. But anyway, okay, so we'll get started on making just some final little adjustments. So Alt, Control, Shift, and E creates a merge layer of all those layers underneath. I've noticed once when I was looking at this image, the female, she's actually got a tick, I believe it's a tick on her bill, and I'm not sure what this is. So I'm a bit pedantic a lot of the time when it comes to cleaning up faces of birds and whatnot. So I want to remove that tick because it's not that pleasant to look at. So to do that, I just get the poly lasso tool up here, and I just do a selection around the tick. And I hold down the Shift key to make it another selection, which is this white part on the bill. Doesn't have to be exact. Photoshop does a really good job. And you can come up to here and go fill or content aware fill. Content aware fill is a lot more precise, but the fill is just one less step. and it generally does a pretty good job. To undo the selection, it's Control D, and it hasn't, I don't like this black area that it's selected, so I'll just do it again. So edit and fill, and it's got rid of that. It's done a fairly good job on here. I don't really like this white area, so I'll just quickly get the spot healing brush and I'll just get rid of a few of these white areas that it didn't do such a good job on. Again, this is purely preference, cleaning up birds and faces. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. I just like to do it. It just makes it a little bit cleaner, in my opinion. Looking pretty good, so I'll show you before and after. It's done a pretty good job on its own. You'd be hard pressed to tell once you zoom out that we have removed those. Okay, so clean that up, and now I want to add a little bit of contrast. So to do that, I've got an action and it just makes it pop a little bit, just adds a little bit of contrast to it, levels adjustment. Just got to be careful when you do that because it often can blow out your whites. So I can just quickly add a mask using the paintbrush tool, got to make it black, and I'm just wanting to hide the lighter areas so they don't have this contrast added just to the brightest areas. Okay, I do a curves layer and I go up to the preset and I do linear contrast, just like an S curve, and it just makes it a little bit brighter, but it's a bit too much, so I want to turn that down a little bit. Very, very minor. A lot of the time it's just little subtle changes. I'm happy with that. Next, I now need to merge these layers, so Control Alt Shift and E. Next step is the sharpening. So how I sharpen images is I do a high pass filter, and I'll show you how I do that. But just looking at it, the male is actually pretty good. It doesn't need a lot of sharpening added to it. It's the female that has the issues. So the female's a little bit soft. So I probably just want to apply the sharpening mainly to the female, and we can do that using a mask. But what I will do is we will apply the high pass, so filter, other, high pass, and the radius number here, the higher that number, the more sharpening that will be applied. 2 is a little bit too much, and then I can use the opacity filter to reduce it to how I like it. And you come over to this drop down here on the right hand side and pick overlay, and you'll see the difference in the sharpening that's been applied. It's quite drastic and it does an excellent job on that female, but it's done too much on the male. You can see the male has now gone crunchy, and we don't want that. So I just want to apply this to the female. So to do that, I need to create a mask, but I need to do a selection of the female first. So I need to make sure that a layer with the birds is selected. I come up to the left hand side, quick selection tool, and I just go around the female and add the female, which it has done. So I don't really want the perch or the male, so I've created a selection. So I now click back onto that high pass layer. If I hit the mask tool, it's now created a mask and just revealed the female. So if I click on and off, so as you can see, big difference on the female on the sharpening, but it hasn't applied any to the male at all. So that mask is just applied to the female. But say I just want a little bit of sharpening added to the male's face, I can just grab the paintbrush tool, make sure that it's white to reveal. So remember, we've got that sharp layer underneath that we're hiding, and I can reveal it, but I don't want to reveal 100%. I don't want to go to the 100% sharpening of that layer, so I can change the opacity. Say I change the opacity here to say 20%, and when I brush this on, it's revealing 20% of that layer So it's only reduced. So the easy way to think of it is it's 20% sharpening instead of 100. So now if I paint that on, it's just doing 20%, which is about right. I don't want to do it too much. Let's have a look. It's done a little bit, just enough. So I'm happy with that. So if we look at the before and after, yep, happy with that. Okay, I think that's pretty good. So I'm pretty happy with how that image is looking now. I've done a few little adjustments. It's sharp, everything's looking good. There's no noise reduction because of how bright the background is. There's no noise whatsoever, and the ISO wasn't too high. I'll show you the before and after so you can see. So I'll just copy the bottom layer that we started with and I'll drag it to the top so we can have a look. So that was the original image, and that is the processed image. So the original image had the soft female and the soft perch, if you remember. And the final one, we obviously we blended those two layers and we've got the sharp one now instead. So it's actually quite a big difference in the before and after adding that sharp. So that's what we've done. Yeah, I guess we can have a discussion below if you want on whether you would use two exposures and whether you think that's some people may say it's cheating. Ultimately, I've taken both images, they're available to me, and it was pretty through the camera limitation of the depth of field which has prevented me from getting the entire image sharp. So by having the two versions, I can create what I was looking at with my own eyes. Again, it's entirely up to you whether you do it or not. I'm happy to do it. I'm always open, and I will say what I've done. So when you're in the field, if you're up to this, just remember to take multiple images at a time. Sometimes, even if you've got two birds, sometimes I'll focus on the left bird and the right bird, knowing that I may have to merge those later if they're not both sharp. So that's just something to think about when you're photographing multiple birds on the one perch. What other tips? So yeah, thank you very much for sticking with it. I know it's long, and I do appreciate the feedback and the comments. If you want to continue to see this sort of content, be sure to subscribe, hit that little bell if you want to be notified when I put up new videos. I really do appreciate the support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.